Hi everyone, for our video today, it's a brush haul video and I received some brushes from Fudebobo. So before we continue, I would like to give a huge thank you to Fudebobo for sending these my way. I truly appreciate it. Thank you so much. Domo arigatou gozaimasu. But what we're going to do is we're going to divide these brushes into two separate videos because I think if I talk about all these brushes in one video, it's going to be way too long and I might lose your interest. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about these brushes first on these videos. So these are all Yoshiki By Koyudo brushes, and then the next video we're going to be talking about the Chikuhodo and Fudebobo collaboration brushes, her Nebulae series, because we have new brushes to talk about. So of course everything is going to be down in the description box. All the links to any videos that's related to this vlog, it's going to be there. Okay, so these three brushes that we have here, they're all made by Koyudo. The main difference is these two brushes are Yoshiki By Koyudo brushes, while this brush here is a special brush because this is a collaboration brush between Koyudo and Fudebobo. Now if you're a fan of Fudebobo, you would have known by now that she actually released special eyeshadow brushes a while back that featured red Canadian squirrel and Saikoho goat hairs for their bristles. Now I have actually talked about those brushes in a separate vlog, so if you're interested to know my thoughts about those, I'm gonna put the link down on the description box, okay? But I am actually so excited to have this right now. I have been eyeing this for months because this is my first brush that has red Canadian squirrel and Saikoho goat hairs mixed into the bristles that we'll be using on the face. So I am so excited to see how this will work with me today. Now, the three brushes that we have today as well, two of these brushes were sent to me via PR, and this brush I actually purchased for myself. Again, thank you so much, Fudebobo. I truly appreciate it. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to talk about these brushes one by one. So the first brush here is the Yoshiki By Koyudo 3D eyeshadow brush. Now I have actually been eyeing this brush on Fudebobo's website because my main attraction to this brush is actually the brush head design here, because it actually looks like the tips of your fingers. And sometimes we love putting on makeup using our fingers. Like we can drag foundation in our face with our fingers. We can even apply concealer or even lipstick using our fingers, and this just really looks like the tips of your fingers. And I love these types of eyeshadow brushes because automatically when I see something like this, I actually will decide to use it for concealer application in the under eye area. And now that I have this here, I can say that it's actually quite similar to the Chikuhodo F010, but the main difference is the design of the brush head, because the Koyudo 3D brush here has a more angular design in comparison to the F010 that we have here. And also by feel alone, I can say that there's more strength in the core of the F010 here in comparison to this 3D brush from Koyudo. So in theory, I can say that I can use the Koyudo 3D eyeshadow brush here for concealers with lighter viscosity, wherein I don't need very strong brush heads to actually blend it out. While the F010 here, for sure I will use this for concealer products that have thicker viscosity, or for those that are actually quite difficult to blend out. Now by the way, the Chikuhodo F010 brush here uses silver fox hair, while this Koyudo 3D eyeshadow brush uses undyed Saikoho goat hairs. So I'm actually very interested to see how this will work with me. So the next brush that I have here is the Yoshiki By Koyudo Kakishibuzome Highlight and Cheek Brush. The brush head is made of Saikoho goat hairs dyed using persimmon tannins, giving it this very nice orange colored hue. The shape of this is flame-like. It's actually very reminiscent of a calligraphy brush, and the bristles are actually very airy on the tips. Look at that. Isn't that so pretty? It's so gorgeous. I love the black ferrule here, and then you have the very nice shiny black handle here that fades into this very nice warm toned red at the base of the handle, which by the way is very similar to the colorway that we have for the 3D eyeshadow brush that I showed you earlier. Now this type of a handle design is very similar across a lot of the Yoshiki By Koyudo brushes that is being released. Now there's also a version that sometimes they release a brush wherein we have an all black handle. So if you're a Fude lover or if you delve into the world of Fude, this brush looks very similar to that of the TF3 brush of Sonyaji. And the main reason why is because Koyudo makes both brushes. Now, I have actually been told that this brush head design here is actually trademarked by Koyudo. So only Koyudo can make these types of brush heads, okay? Now, the main difference between these two brushes is actually the brush head length, wherein the Sonyaji TF3 here has 36 millimeters of bristle length, while the Koyudo brush here has 34 millimeters. And when I'm just running my fingers through the brush heads, I can also feel a slight difference in core strength, wherein the brush head here of the Sonyaji TF3 brush has a softer core in comparison to that of the Koyudo brush here. Now, I think the main reason why they added more strength in the core of the Koyudo brush here is maybe because you can actually use this for like maybe a much more targeted application of color, may it be for contouring or even for bronzer or for contouring application. Because when you actually brush the brush head here on your cheeks, you can actually see the way that it just doesn't really bloom out much in comparison to that of the TF3. So look how much the TF3 blooms. Look at that. So this brush is truly for blush application or even finishing powder. But for this one, I think they made it to be used for cheek color application. So I am very excited to see how this will work with me a little bit later on the video. And the final brush that we have here is this cheek brush, which is a collaboration release between Koyudo and Fudebobo. And what makes this brush so special is that we have a mix of red Canadian squirrel and Saikoho goat hairs for its brush head. I'm very, very excited for this because this is the first time that I'm having a brush head mix like this for the face. Isn't that so amazing? I'm actually so excited to try this out. And when I'm just looking at the brush head design of this, it's quite small. It's actually almost the size of my thumb here, which is very interesting. And also from this angle, it looks like it's flat and paddle-like in design. But if you tilt the brush here and look at it from this angle, it looks rounded. And if you follow me here on my YouTube channel, I have always expressed on how much I love rounded brush head designs like this. And also one other thing, as I'm just continually looking at this, it looks like a very big blender eyeshadow brush. Look at that. So in me saying that, maybe we can use this in a blending manner. And the main reason why is because when I was playing with the brush head earlier, before I did this video, I can see that the brush head here snaps back into position quite nicely and also very snappy. So we have so much strength in the core of this, and maybe I could attribute that on the way that it's bundled. So you will actually be able to use this brush in a buffing manner to blend out colors. So I believe that this is how you use it. You buff the color this way. And also because so when you press the bristle here on your cheeks, it doesn't really splay out much. So it doesn't encompass a large real estate on the face. But this brush for sure will apply a very nice controlled amount of application of color on the face. Very interesting. I'm actually excited to see how this will work with me today. Okay, look at that. And also one other thing, now that I'm just playing around with the brush head here on my cheeks, it feels very silky and very soft. It also has a way of adapting into the natural contours of your face. And I can also use this to apply setting powder here in the under eye area, because again we have red Canadian squirrel and Saikoho goat hairs here, so it's not prickly. And if you're someone who has sensitive eyes, this would be great to use in that area. And also one other thing, I love the size of this, because it's small. And a lot of the palettes that's being released into the market today have very small, pans. So for example, I have this palette from Hourglass here. And the brush head here will just really fit perfectly into that. And I won't be able to pick up colors from the neighboring pan here because I don't want that. So if I'm very specific with the type of color that I want, this brush can really help me with that. And what else do I have here? Even this groundwork palette from Danessa Myrix. The pan here is actually very small that I can actually use this brush for that. But I'm not so sure if I'm willing to use this brush for these types of formulas because I'm not so sure yet on how resilient red Canadian squirrel bristles are. But like, maybe in the future, if I decide to be adventurous, maybe I can create an updated vlog, like, a few months from now. Or I'm just gonna put a pinned comment down below and tell you about my experience using this brush for those types of formulas. But for now, I'm gonna be using this for powder products, okay? Alright, so now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna put on, like, a thin layer of foundation, and then we'll be using these brushes one by one on my face. Now, by the way, I already have my skincare on, I have my brows on, I already have some sunscreen on, and now it's time for us to proceed and use a mist. Now, unfortunately, something happened to my Lisa Eldridge Skin and Makeup Enhancing Mist here because this fell just as I was about to do this portion of the video, and it fell without the cap on, and it kind of like busted the way that it would spray out the mist. So what I did is I actually, like, sprayed a little bit of the mist here on my palette. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a flat brush. And I'm going to apply this all over. And I'm a little bit irritated right now because this mist from Lisa is relatively new. So it's still quite full. And it's busted. So I don't know if I'm going to be able to transfer that to a different packaging with a nice spritzer, but we'll see. But for now, like, brushing it all over is also an effective way to do it. Let's not waste a very good product. Okay, that's good. And now let's add some foundation. I'm gonna be using my Armani Luminous Silk Foundation here, and I'm gonna apply a nice thin layer all over, really buff it in and really spread it around. Okay, so that's the foundation down. I love it, nice and even and buffed in. Perfect. Okay, so it's time for us to try the 3D eyeshadow brush here, and I'm going to be primarily using this for concealer application. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a much more lighter type of viscosity on this eye, and I'm going to be using the Creamy Radiant concealers from NARS, okay? So I have two colors here. I believe I have ginger and custard, and I'm picking them up here from the palette. It actually picks up a good amount of product. Okay, it lays the product very well. Also no prickling sensation at all. Very nice sensation. The pressure is very comfortable, and I love that I'm able to stipple in the formula, and I'm just like, using a patting motion here, which is actually great, especially if you want to build coverage that you want. And let me buff out the edges. Yes, it also enables me to buff out and blend out edges. I love it. So I'm just like, flipping the way that I hold the brush, and let me just like, try to add an angle here. And that can just really help me to create a lift. And I can actually see that there's no streaking at all, and it applied the formula quite nicely, and it's also not disturbing the foundation that I applied earlier. That's actually quite nice. I love it. And now I'm gonna be using some of this, like, soft matte complete concealer from NARS, and this one has a thicker consistency, like, in terms of viscosity. And yes, it also applies the product very well, but I think because the consistency of this concealer is thicker, I can see some streaking. But if you just continue to pat it on and, like, continue to blend it out, it still actually kind of works. And of course, because the formula of this is actually thicker, you'd actually see more coverage on the face. But again, it actually lays the product quite nicely. It's still able to blend it out despite its thickness. But, like, basing off of my theory earlier, I would prefer to use this brush for lighter concealer formulas. And if you're watching this video and you don't feel like using this brush for concealer application, of course you can use this for eyeshadow application. Like example, if you want to build intensity or opacity, this would be great. If you want to apply a nice topper color, this would actually also be great. And I think you can also use this if you want to apply a very nice precise application of highlight color on your cheeks. It's just like, you know, absolutely perfect. I think this is a nice, well-rounded, all-around type of a brush. Okay, love that you've worked for me today. Okay, so let's move on. So I have here my Chanel Le Beige Healthy Glow Bronzer. I love this, so I'm just gonna get this brush and, like, you know, swirl it around. And I can see that it picks up the product quite nicely. And I'm just gonna apply this in a bronzer kind of a manner. Lovely. Let me buff that out. Now what I love about these, like, you know, Kakishibuzome dyed bristles is that they're actually, like, you know, quite sturdy, and they just have a way of blending out color quite nicely. Look at that. It's very soft and very delicate. And I'm also loving, like, you know, I'm able to apply the bronzer in a very nice precise manner wherein it's, like, you know, bronzing me to a certain degree, which I love. Very nice. I love that. Look how nice and soft. Just enough. And out of curiosity, let's add some highlighter. So I have a little bit of that here now at the back of my hand. And let me just buff it on. Ooh, okay. That actually applied the product very well. It also blended it quite nicely. Nice blend of color. I don't see any disturbance at all with the product or the formula that was applied under. So I can already see that the bristles here are clumping together, but it's not, like, you know, a bad clump. They're still maintaining its integrity quite nicely. So let me just buff the brush head here on a microfiber towel just to remove any excess, like, you know, cream and liquid formula. Okay, so it fluffed back fantastic. So I have here a blush from Danessa Myrick. So this is Rosean Brunch. Did I get the name right? Yeah, so this is from her Yummy Skin Blurring Balm Powder Flush. So these are her blushes. So I'm just gonna get a little bit of the blush here. I'm not gonna go overboard with this because these are highly pigmented. And I'm just gonna tap this here on the highest points of my cheeks. And I'm just, like, you know, really pouncing the brush head, and it's actually blending the color very nicely into all the products that I have on my cheeks right now. And we have a very nice soft wash of color. And because the tip here is, like, you know, quite elongated, it's almost like, you know, you're able to use it as a guide to be able to bring the color into the area of the face that you want. Very nice. I love that. Maybe let me pick up some more and do the other side. Oh, picked up way too much. So let me buff out the product and let me see on how well this brush can buff it out. Yeah, it does, but I just, like, you know, picked up way too much. So let me get the brush that I used earlier for foundation and let me just remove a little bit of that. Okay. Glad that worked. So let me just continue to buff and build and blend. Alright, so I was actually quite happy to see that I was also able to use this brush for blush application, especially these types of formulas. And it was actually also very easy to blend it out. But one thing I do have to say though is that you have to be very careful with how much product you pick up, because the brush head here again is also quite long and it's also quite airy, so it doesn't have, like, you know, the strength of, let's say, a buffer brush. So if you make a mistake, you can always, like, you know, use the foundation brush that you used earlier just to buff out the edges, blend out the edges, and to pick up any excess color, because this brush might not be able to do that. But, like, you know, if you're able to work with the product gently and to build slowly, this brush is absolutely perfect and it will be a joy to have in your collection. Alright, so it's time for us to set our under eye concealer. So I have here my translucent setting powder from Laura Mercier. And then before we continue, let me just tap the concealer just to remove any creasing whatsoever. And let me get the Fudebobo and Koyudo Red Squirrel Saikoho brush. It feels so silky. It feels so luxurious. And it actually is able to apply, to blend, and to buff out, like, your loose setting powders. That's actually great. I love that. I love that we're actually quite, be able to be very specific with your powder application. And I love that the brush head here is not disturbing, the products that we applied earlier. And I can see that you apply a much more opaque amount of color. The brush head is small and round. It's quite dense. It will pick up more product, which is great for me because I'm someone who has oily skin. So sometimes I really need to pat on powder on the face. Okay, let me blend that into the cheeks now. It will also really help soften the edges of the blush. I love that. Okay. Fantastic. So let me just get a bigger brush now just to set the rest of my face. So I have here the powder brush here from the Nebulae series of Fudebobo and Chikuhodo. Alright, and let me just continue to buff out any excess powder here in the under eye area. I love this brush. Love it. Okay, so now let's continue to play around some more. So let me get a finishing powder from this palette, which I believe is this color here. Again, I love how the brush head fits into the pan here. And yeah, so I'm actually able to be very specific with my powder application. I love it. Now I can actually see that the brush head here picked out the right amount of powder. It didn't pick up way too much. Because as I've said in previous videos, if you pick up way too much finishing powders in one go, it can really make your skin look cakey, and we don't want that. But we want to your skin to look very nice and soft focus, especially if you're using finishing powders. Okay, so I have the color Fresco here from Laura Mercier. It's one of my most favorite blushes ever, and this has a bit of shimmer in it as well, so it's not a very full matte color. So let me just remove any excess powder here on the microfiber towel in front of me. Let me pick up some of this blush and let me apply this on top of the cream blush that I applied earlier. I can see the warmth coming through, and let me just buff out the color. Very nice. Let me add that here. It's not disturbing, again, the products that I used earlier. It's buffing out the color quite nicely, and I'm just using it in a buffing motion, in a nice rounded buffing motion, in the same way that you're applying eyeshadow into your eyes, and it's actually also doing the job quite nicely. But again, if you really want to have a nice soft blend, be very careful with how much product you pick up from the pan. And also the way that you press the brush head into the cheek to buff out the color. You have to be very light-handed because you don't really need to exert so much effort with the brush here because the brush head is very, very strong. So the brush, let the tips of the bristles do the work for you. And if you so desire, you can just pick up more of the blush color here and apply it all over your eyelid, just to have a nice light wash of color, and that kind of works. And to finish it off, maybe let's get a nice highlighting color. Let's try this. Pick up a little bit of this and apply it here on top of my cheekbones and blend it. And that's actually good in my book. Alright, so I believe that we have come to the end of our video for these 3 brushes today. So I hope that you enjoyed getting to know these brushes with me. And if you have any more questions about my experience using these brushes or any products that I use today, please let me know down in the comments box and let's have a conversation about it, okay? Alright, so that's it for me today. I'm gonna let you guys go now. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for being here. And I hope that you're having a good day wherever you are. Bye!